So, hello and welcome back yet again to Mr. Charles Dickens novel, The Tale of Two Cities, where the last couple of chapters we have met Monsieur le Marquis, who seems to be a incredibly evil person who I don't think I want anywhere near me. Just as a me thing, he seems like a absolutely vile individual. I suppose maybe he's nice to his dog. Probably not. So we definitely have met a thoroughly disagreeable human who does not seem to have any empathy for anyone who is below him in station, and doesn't even really seem to have much empathy for the person who I'm assuming was the King of France. It's really hard to tell who we were talking about with the Monsignor who could not even manage to drink hot chocolate by himself, but I kind of am getting the impression that maybe that was the king and this is one of the dukes or whatever. So, yeah, he drove through the countryside, ran over somebody's kid, and then had a hitchhiker on his carriage. I'm a little lost on all of it, but hopefully it will all be clarified as we jump back in and read Chapter 9 of A Tale of Two Cities in Book 2, A Golden Thread, and Chapter 9 is titled The Gorgon's Head. And that rhymed. That was fun. It was a heavy, massive building, that chateau of Monsieur the Marquis, with a large stone courtyard before it, and two stone sweeps of staircase meeting in a stone terrace before the principal door. A stony business altogether, with heavy stone balustrades, and stone urns, and stone flowers, and stone faces of men, and stone heads of lions in all directions, as if the Gorgon's Head had surveyed it when it was finished 2 centuries ago. Up the broad flight of shallow steps, Monsieur the Marquis Flambeau proceeded, went from his carriage, sufficiently disturbing the darkness to elicit loud noises from an owl in the roof of the great pile of stable building that was away among the trees. Everything else was so quiet that the flambeau carried up the steps and the other flambeau held at the great door burned as if they were in a close room of state instead of being in the open night air. Other sound than the owl's voice there was none, save the falling of a fountain into its stone basin, for it was one of those dark nights that hold their breath by the hour together and then heave a long low sigh and then hold their breath again. The great door clanged behind him, and Monsieur the Marquis crossed a hall, grim with certain old boar spears, swords, and knives of the chase, and grimmer still with certain heavy riding rods and riding whips, of which many a peasant, gone to his benefactor Death, had felt the weight when Monsieur the Marquis was angry. Avoiding the large rooms, which were made dark and fast for the night, Monsieur the Marquis, with his flambeau bearer going on in front of him, went up the staircase to a door in a corridor. This, thrown open, admitted him to his own private apartment of 3 rooms, his bedchamber, and 2 more. High vaulted rooms, with cool, uncarpeted floors, great dogs upon the hearths for the burning of wood in the winter time, and all luxuries befitting the state of a marquis in a luxurious age and country. The fashion of the last Louis but one, of the line that was never to break, the 14th Louis, was conspicuous in their rich furniture, but it was diversified by many objects that were illustrations of old pages from the history of France. A supper table was laid for 2 in the 3rd room, a round room, One of the chateau's 4 extinguisher-top towers, a small lofty room with its windows wide open and the wooden jalousie blinds closed, so that the dark night only showed in slight horizontal lines of black, alternating with broad lines of stone color. "My nephew," said the Marquis, glancing at the supper. "They say he has not arrived." Nor was he. But he had been expected with the Monseigneur. "Ah," said the Monseigneur, "it is not probable he will arrive tonight. Nevertheless, leave the table as it is. I shall be ready in a quarter hour." And in a quarter of an hour, Monseigneur was ready and sat down alone to his sumptuous choice supper. His chair was opposite to the window, and he had taken his soup and was raising his glass of Bordeaux to his lips when he put it down. "What is that?" he calmly asked, looking with attention at the horizontal lines of blackened stone. "Monseigneur? That?" "Outside of the blinds. Open the blinds." It was immediately done. "Well?" "Monseigneur, it is nothing. The trees and the night are all that are here." The servant who had said this had thrown the blinds wide and had looked out into the vacant darkness and stood with that blankness behind him, looking around for instruction. "Good," said the Monseigneur. "Close them again." That was done as well, and the Marquis went on with his supper. He was halfway through it when he again stopped with his glass in hand, hearing the sound of wheels. It came briskly and came to the front of his chateau. "Ask who has arrived." It turned out to be the nephew of Monseigneur. He had been some few leagues behind the Marquis early in the afternoon. He had diminished the distance rapidly, but not so rapidly as to come up with the Monseigneur upon the road. He had heard about the Marquis at the posting houses as coming before him. He was to be told, said Monseigneur, that supper was awaiting him then and there, and he was told to come to it. In a little while he came. He was the man known in England as Charles Darnay. Monseigneur received him in a courtly manner, but they did not shake hands. "You left Paris yesterday, sir?" said Charles Darnay to the Monseigneur as he took his seat. "Yesterday. And you?" "I came here direct." "From London?" "Yes." "You've been a long time coming," said the Marquis with a smile. "On the contrary, I came here directly." "Pardon me. I mean not a long time on the journey, a long time intending the journey." "I've been detained." He stopped for a moment. "By various businesses." "Without a doubt," said the Marquis. So long as a servant was present, no other word passed between them. When coffee had been served, and they were alone together, the nephew, Charles Darnay, looking at the uncle and meeting the eyes of the face that was like a fine mask, began a conversation. "I have come back, sir, as you anticipate, pursuing the object that took me away. It carried me into great and unexpected peril, but it is a sacred object, and if it had carried me to death, I hope that it would have sustained me." "Not to death," said the Marquis. "It is not necessary to say to death." "I doubt, sir," said Charles, "whether if it had carried me to the utmost brink of death, you would have cared to stop me there." The marks on the Marquis's nose and the lengthening of the fine straight lines in his cruel face looked ominous as to that. The uncle made a graceful gesture of protest, which was so clearly a slight form of good breeding that was not reassuring at all. "Indeed, sir," said the nephew, "for anything I know, you may have expressly worked to give a more suspicious appearance to the circumstances that surrounded me." "Oh, no, no, no," said the uncle. "But however it may be," resumed Charles Darnay, glancing at him with distrust, "I know that your diplomacy would stop me by any means, and would know no scruple as to those means." "My friend, I told you so," said the uncle, with a pulsation in his nose marks. "Do me a favor to recall that I told you long, long ago." "I recall." "Thank you," said the Marquis. His tone lingered in the air, almost like the tone of a musical instrument. "In effect, sir," said the nephew, "I believe it to be at once your bad fortune and my good fortune that has kept me out of prison in France here." "I do not understand," said the Marquis, sipping at his coffee. "Dare I ask you to explain?" Charles Darnay pursed his lips. "I believe that if you were not in disgrace with the court, and had not been overshadowed by that for years past, a lettre de cachet would have been sent to me and sent me to some fortress forever." "It is possible," said the Marquis with great calmness. "For the honor of the family, I could even resolve to incommode you to that extent. Excuse me for it. I perceive, happily for me, the reception of the day before yesterday was as usual a cold one in court," said Charles. "I would not say happily, my friend," said the Marquis, with refined politeness. "I would not be sure of that. A good opportunity for consideration, surrounded by the advantages of solitude, might influence your destiny to a far greater advantage than you influence it for yourself. But it is useless to discuss the question. I am, as you have said, at a disadvantage. These little instruments of correction, these gentle aids to the power and honor of families, these slight favors that might so incommode you, are only to be obtained now by interest and importunity. They're sought by so many, and they are granted to so comparatively few. It used to not be so. But France in all these things is changed for the worst. Our not remote ancestors held the right of life and death over the surrounding vulgar peasants. From this room, many such dogs have been taken out to be hanged. In the next room, my bedroom, one fellow, to our knowledge, was poignarded on the spot for professing some insolent delicacy respecting his daughter. His daughter! We have lost many privileges. A new philosophy has become the mode and assertion of our station in these days. It might, I don't go so far as to say it would, but it might cause us inconvenience. It's all very bad." Then the Marquis took a gentle little pinch of snuff and shook his head as elegantly despondent as he could of a country still containing himself by great means of regeneration. "We have so asserted our station, both in the old time and in the modern time, that I believe our name to be more hated than any in France. Oh well, "Let us hope that it is," said the Marquis. "Hatred of the high is the involuntary homage of the low." "There is not," said Charles Darnay, "a face that I can look at, in all of this country round about us, that looks at me with any deference on it, but the dark deference of fear and slavery." "That is a compliment," said the Marquis, "to the grandeur of the family, merited by the manner in which the family has sustained this grandeur. Ha!" And at that he took another gentle pinch of snuff and lightly crossed his legs. But when his nephew, Charles Darnay, leaning an elbow on the table, covered his eyes thoughtfully and dejectedly with his hand, the fine mask looked at him sideways, with a stronger concentration of keenness, closeness, and dislike than was compatible with its wearer's assumption of indifference. "Repression is only the lasting philosophy that we can trust. The dark deference of fear and slavery," the Marquis went on. "It will keep the dogs obedient to the whip as long as this roof," he looked up, "shuts out the sky." That might not be as long as the Marquis supposed. If a picture of the chateau, as it was to be in a few years, and of 50 more years like it, as they were too to be a few years hence, could have been shown to him that night, he might have been at a loss as to claim his own form from the ghastly, fire-charred, plunder-racked ruins. As for the roof that he so loved, he might have found that shutting out the sky in a new way, to wit, forever, from the eyes of the bodies into which its lead was fired out of the barrels of 100,000 muskets. "Meanwhile," said the Marquis, ignorant of all this, "I will preserve the honor and the repose of the family, even if you will not. But you must be tired. Shall we terminate this conference for the night?" "A moment more." "An hour, if you would like." "Sir," said Charles Darnay, "we have done wrong, and we are reaping the fruits of that wrong." "We have done wrong?" said the Marquis, with an inquiring smile, and delicately pointing first at his nephew, then to himself. "Our family, our honorable family, whose honor is of so much account to both of us in different ways. Even in my father's time, we did a world of wrong. We injured every human creature who came between us and our pleasure, whoever it was. Why need I speak of my father's time, when it was equally yours? Can I separate my father's twin brother, joint inheritor, and next successor from himself?" "Death did that for you," said the Marquis. "And death has left me," said his nephew, "bound to a system that is frightful to me, responsible for it, but powerless in it, seeking to execute the last request of my dear mother's lips, and to obey the last look of my dear mother's eyes, which implored me to have mercy and to redress, and tortured by seeking assistance and power in vain." "Seeking them from me, my nephew," said the Marquis, touching him on the breast with his finger. They were now standing next to the hearth. "You will forever seek in vain, be assured of that." Every fine, straight line in his clear, white face was cruelly, craftily, and closely compressed while he stood looking quietly at his nephew, snuff-box in his hand. Once again he touched him on the breast, as though his finger were the fine point of a small sword, with which, in delicate finesse, he ran through his nephew's body as he said, My friend, I will die perpetuating the system under which I have lived. And saying that, he took one last pinch of snuff and put the box in his pocket. Better to be a rational creature, he said then, after ringing a small bell on the table, and accept your natural destiny. But you are lost, Monsieur Charles, I see. This property and France are lost to me, said Charles Darnay sadly. I renounce them. Are they yours to renounce? France, maybe, but this property? It's not worth mentioning, but is it yet? I had no intention, with the words I used, to claim it, yet. If it passed from me to you tomorrow, which I have the vanity to hope is not likely, or in 20 years. Oh, you do me too much honor, said the Marquis. Still, I do prefer that. I would abandon it, and I would live otherwise than elsewhere. It's very little to relinquish for me. What is it but a wilderness of misery and ruin? Ha! Said the Marquis as he looked around the luxurious room. Oh, yeah. To the eye, it is fair enough. But seen in its integrity, under the sky and by the daylight, it's a crumbling tower of waste, mismanagement, extortion, debt, mortgage, oppression, hunger, nakedness, and suffering. Humph, said the Marquis again, seemingly well satisfied. If it ever becomes mine, it shall be put into some hands better qualified to free it slowly, if such a thing is possible, from the weights that drag it down, so that the miserable people who cannot leave it, and who have been long wrung to the last point of their endurance, may, in another generation, perhaps suffer less. But it's not for me. There's a curse on it, and on all of this land. And you, said the Marquis, forgive my curiosity. Do you, under your new philosophy, graciously intend to go on living? I must do. To live, what others of my countrymen, even with the nobility on their backs, may have to do some day, I'll have to work. Work in England, for example? Yes. The family honor, sir, is safe from me in this country. The family name can suffer from me in no other, for I will bear it in no other. The ringing of the bell had caused the adjoining bedchamber to be lighted, and it now shone brightly through the door of communication. The Marquis looked that way and listened for the retreating step of his valet. England is very attractive to you, seeing how indifferently you've prospered there, he said, turning his calm face back to his nephew with a smile. I have already said that for my prospering there, I am sensible that I may be indebted to you. For the rest, it is my refuge. They say, those boastful English, that it is the refuge of many. You know a compatriot who has found refuge there as well? A doctor? Yes. With a daughter? Yes. Yes, said the Marquis. You are fatigued. Good night. As he bent his head in his most courtly manner, there was a secrecy on his smiling face, and he conveyed an air of mystery with those words, which struck the eyes and ears of his nephew forcibly. At the same time, the thin, straight lines of the setting of the eyes, and the thin, straight lips, and the markings on the nose, all curved with a sarcasm that looked quite diabolic. Yes, said the Marquis. A doctor with a daughter. Yes. And so commences this new philosophy. Obviously, you're tired. Good night. It would have been of as much avail to interrogate any stone face outside of the chateau as to interrogate the Marquis. Charles Darnay looked at him in vain as he passed on to the door. "Good night," said the uncle. "I look to the pleasure of seeing you again in the morning. Good rest. Light monsieur my nephew to his chamber, and burn monsieur the nephew in his bed, if you will," he said to himself before ringing the bell again, as he summoned his valet to his own bedroom. With the valet come and gone, Monsieur the Marquis walked to and fro in his loose chamber robe to prepare himself gently for sleep on that hot, still night. Rustling about the room, his softly slippered feet making no noise on the floor, he looked like a refined tiger. Looked like some enchanted marquis of the impenitently wicked sort in a story whose periodical change into tiger form was either just about to come or just ended. He moved from end to end of his voluptuous bedroom, looking again at the scraps of the day's journey that came unbidden to his mind, to the slow toil up the hill at sunset, to the setting sun, the descent, the mill, the prison on the crag, the little village in the hollow, the peasants at the fountain, the mender of roads with his blue cap pointing out the chain under his carriage, the fountain that seemed a bit like the fountain in Paris, with the little bundle lying on the step, the woman bending over it, and the tall man with his arms up crying, "Dead!" "I am now cool," said Monsieur the Marquis, "and I may go to bed." So, leaving only one light burning on the hearth, he let his thin gauze curtains fall around him, and he heard the night break its silence with a long sigh as he composed himself for sleep. The stone faces on the outer walls stared blindly at the black night for 3 heavy hours. For 3 heavy hours, the horses in the stables rattled at their racks, the dog barked, and the owl made a noise with very little resemblance in it to the noise conventionally assigned to the owl by poets. But it is the obstinate custom of such creatures to rarely say what men say they do. For 3 heavy hours, the stone faces of the chateau, lion and human, stared blindly into the night. Dead darkness lay on all the landscape. Dead darkness added its own hush to the hushing dust on the roads. The burial place that had got to the pass. Trying that again. The burial place that had got to the pass, that its little heaps of grass were undistinguishable from one another. The figure on the cross might have come down for anything that could be seen of it. In the village, the taxers and the taxed were fast asleep, dreaming perhaps of banquets, as the hungry usually do, and of ease and rest as the driven slave and the yoked ox may. The village's lean inhabitants slept soundly, and in their sleep were fed and freed. The fountain in the village flowed unseen and unheard, and the fountain at the chateau dropped unseen and unheard, both melting away like the minutes that were falling from the spring of time through those 3 dark hours. Then the gray of both began to be ghostly in the light, and the eyes of the stone faces of the chateau opened. It grew lighter and lighter, until at last the sun touched the tops of the trees and poured its radiance over the hill. In the glow, the water of the chateau fountain seemed to turn to blood, and the stone faces turned crimson. The song of the birds was loud and high, and on the weather-beaten sill of the great window of the bedchamber of Monsieur the Marquis, one little bird sang its sweetest song with all of its might. At this, the nearest stone face seemed to stare in amazement, and with mouth dropped and the jaw open, seemed to look awestruck. Now the sun was full up, and movement began in the village. Windows opened, doors were unbarred, and the people came forth shivering, chilled as yet by the new sweet air. Then began the rarely lightened toil of the day amongst the village population, some to the fountain, some to the fields, men and women here to dig and delve, men and women there to see to the poor livestock and to lead the bony cows out to such pasture as could be found by the roadside. In the church, at the cross, a kneeling figure or two, attendant on the latter prayers, led the cow who was trying for a breakfast amongst the weeds at the foot of the cross. The chateau itself awoke later, as because its quality, but it did awaken gradually and surely. First, the lonely boar spears and knives of the chase had been reddened as of old, and then they had gleamed trenchant in the morning sun, and now the doors and windows were thrown open, the horses in the stables looked round over their shoulders at the light and freshness pouring in the doorway, the leaves sparkled and rustled at the iron-gated windows, and the dogs pulled on their chains and reared, impatient to be loosed. All of these trivial things belong to the routine of life and the return of morning. Surely, though, not so the ringing of the great bell of the chateau, nor the running up and down of the stairs, nor the hurried figures on the terrace, nor the booting and tramping here, there, and everywhere, nor the quick saddling of the horses and riding away, though. What winds conveyed this hurry to the grizzled mender of the roads, already at work on the hilltop beyond the village, with his day's dinner, not very much, lying in a bundle that it was worth no crow's while to even peck at? Had the birds, carrying some grains of his lunch off to a distance, dropped one over him as sowing a seed? Whether or not, the mender of roads ran on the sultry morning as though for his life down the hill, knee-high in the dust, and he didn't stop till attaining the fountain. All the people of the village were at this fountain, standing about in their depressed manner, whispering softly, but showing no other emotions other than grim curiosity and surprise. The cows, hastily brought in and tethered to anything that could hold them, were looking on or lying down, chewing their cud of pretty much nothing that repaid their trouble, which they had picked up on their interrupted walk. Some of the people of the chateau, and some of those of the posting houses, and all the taxing authorities were armed more or less, and were crowded on the other side of the little street, in a purposeless way that was highly fraught with nothing. Already the mender of roads had penetrated into the middle of the group of 50 particular friends, and he was smiting himself in the breast with his cap. What did this all portend? And what portended the swift hoisting up of Monsieur Gabelle behind a servant on horseback, and the conveying away of said Monsieur, like a new version of the German ballad of Lenora? It portended that there was one stone face too many up at the chateau. The Gorgon had surveyed the building again during the night, and had added the one stone face, wanting to be a stone face for the last 200 years. The face lay back on the pillow of Monsieur the Marquis. It was like a fine mask, suddenly startled and made angry, then petrified, and driven home. Into the heart of the stone figure was a knife, and around the hilt was a paper to which was scrawled, "Drive him fast to his tomb." This from Jacques. And that is the end of a chapter where we seem to learn a little bit more about Mr. Charles Darnay, who I'm sure is going to be accused of murder because he does seem to have family issues. Interesting. Definitely interesting. I like that the Marquis got his comeuppance. Not gonna lie on that one. I am not surprised that he got stabbed. I also don't think that it was actually Charles Darnay who killed him, but I'm seeing that he's probably going to be accused of it because he probably stands the most to gain from it. My guess for who killed the Marquis, though, is the poor father whose kid got run over. That's what I'm guessing now. We'll see if it's true or not, and we will see what else happens when we return tomorrow to A Tale of Two Cities. But until then, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile, and I'll see you tomorrow.